In the heart of Anambra State, there lived a young man called Emma. He wasn't just an ordinary young man. Emma was one of the richest men in the whole village. People talked about him every day. They said, "Have you seen Emma's car? Do you know Emma just bought another house?" His name was on everyone's lips. Emma had two big houses. One in the center of town and another close to the riverside. Both houses were painted in gold and white. The fences were tall, with sharp iron on top. His gates were the type that could open with just a remote. When he drove through the village in his black Jeep, children would stop and stare. Adults would greet him with smiles and respect. But something was wrong with Emma. Even though he was already rich, he wasn't satisfied. It's like money was never enough for him. He always wanted more and more. One day, he sat on his balcony, drinking cold wine and looking at his two houses. He said to himself, "2 houses, is that all I have? I should have 10. I want to be the biggest landlord in all of Anambra." That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept turning from side to side on his big soft bed. He stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I need more houses, more land, more money." His heart was full of greed. He wanted something bigger than just respect. He wanted power, fame, fear, and he was ready to do anything to get it. The next morning, Emma wore his white agbada, sprayed perfume all over himself, and walked out of his mansion like a king. People greeted him on the road. "Good morning, Sir Emma. Boss Emma, the landlord of landlords." He just smiled and nodded, but deep inside, he was not happy. He needed more houses, more money, more respect. As he walked, he met one of his old friends, Chike, who used to be a native doctor's assistant in another town. "Chike, my brother," Emma shouted. "Emma the rich man," Chike replied with laughter. They hugged and sat under a big mango tree to talk. Emma leaned forward and whispered, "I want more houses, more money. Do you know any way? Secret way. To get it fast." Chike looked around to be sure no one was listening. Then he spoke in a low voice, "There's one powerful native doctor in Nui. If you really want to be bigger than every rich man around here, he can help. But it's not free." Emma's eyes lit up like fire. "Tell me. I'll do anything. Anything at all." Chike paused. He looked very serious now. "You have to sacrifice a virgin girl. About 15 years old. Pure and innocent. Then wealth will flow like river water." Emma blinked. "A virgin?" "Yes," Chike said. "And she must not be from a rich family. She must be helpless." "That's what the native doctor said." Emma scratched his head. His face became dark. But then, slowly, a wicked smile appeared on his lips. "I will find her," he said. 3 days later, it was a hot afternoon in the village. The sun was shining brightly, and the dusty red roads were quiet. A young girl named Adora was walking under the sun with a tray of fresh mangoes on her head. She was just 15 years old, a very beautiful and humble girl with bright eyes and soft voice. "Buy your mango. Sweet mango. Only 20 naira." She shouted as she walked from one house to another. Adora's life was not easy. She lived with her poor mother in a small mud house near the forest path. Her father died when she was still a baby. Her mother was sick most of the time. Every day, Adora would pick mangoes from trees and sell them just to buy food and medicine for her mother. But she never complained. She always smiled. As she walked past Emma's house, her sweet voice echoed through the air. "Buy your mango. Sweet mango." Emma, who was standing by the gate, heard the voice. He slowly turned around and looked at the girl walking. As soon as he saw her, his heart beat faster. "She's perfect," he said to himself. He quickly called out, "Hey! Come here, young girl. I want to buy everything on your tray." Adora stopped. She smiled shyly and walked into his compound. That same night, when the village was quiet and the moon was full, Emma wore a black cloth and entered his car. In the boot of the car was Adora's lifeless body, wrapped in white. He drove quietly through a hidden bush path toward Nui, where the native doctor lived. When he reached the shrine, the place was dark, full of red and black clothes, bones, cowries, and burning candles. The air smelled like blood and smoke. The native doctor sat on a mat, his face covered with white chalk and red powder. His eyes looked like fire. Is she a virgin? The man asked without looking up. Yes, Emma replied. She was the only child of a poor widow. Nobody will ask questions. The native doctor smiled. You have done well, he said. Her spirit will cry, but your money will flow. Go home. Begin to build. Your hands will never lack riches. He gave Emma a small black calabash with red feathers tied around it. Put this in the foundation of your new house. From there, wealth will never stop. Emma took the calabash, bowed, and drove back before daybreak. As he drove, he didn't even think about the girl anymore. His heart was full of joy. He started smiling to himself and whispering, more house, more money, more powerful. He didn't know that Adora's spirit had followed him. Emma returned home before the sun came up. As the village still slept, he took the black calabash and buried it quietly in the foundation of a land behind his mansion. That land had been empty for years, but now, it was going to carry a six-flat apartment. He paid the best builders in the town. Every morning, workers filled the compound, mixing cement, laying blocks, and carrying sand. The sound of hammers and shovels became a daily song in the area. Everyone was surprised. Ah, Emma has started another building. This man is not ordinary. His money doesn't finish. In just a few weeks, the six-flat building began to rise like magic. Every part of it was beautiful. Smooth white walls, shining tiles, fancy balconies, and strong metal doors. The neighbors were amazed. Emma would come out every morning, wearing white clothes and dark glasses, watching the work with a proud smile. But something strange was happening. Nobody ever saw Adora again. Some people asked around. That mango girl has not passed here in days. Her mother said she went out and never came back. Something is not right. But they had no proof. And no one dared to suspect Emma. After all, he was too rich, too powerful, too feared. While the building was rising, Emma's heart was full of pride. He believed the gods were now working for him. But deep below the building, under the very foundation, the spirit of Adora had started to wake. The building was finally completed. Emma called it Golden Heights. People came from far and near to admire it. Tenants rushed to pay for the flats. Within 1 month, all 6 apartments were occupied. There was joy everywhere. Until the first midnight. At exactly 2 a.m., a strange sound echoed in the compound. Buy your mango. Sweet mango. 20 naira only. One of the tenants, a young woman named Ifoma, woke up with confusion. She looked out the window. It was dark. No one was outside. Buy your mango. The voice came again, louder this time. Who is selling mango at midnight? She whispered in fear. She opened her curtain slightly, and what she saw made her scream. Standing in the middle of the compound was a young girl in a torn dress, her body covered in dust, a tray of mangoes on her head. Her eyes were red, and she was not touching the ground. Buy your mango. She shouted again, but her voice sounded like wind blowing through a grave. All the tenants rushed out of their flats, some praying, others running, many falling on the floor. But as they looked again, the girl was gone. By morning, everyone in the building was talking about the ghost. Some thought it was a dream. Others believed it was a joke. But that night, she came back again. After the second night, panic spread like wildfire. The story of the ghost girl selling mangoes at midnight was everywhere. Market women talked about it. Children whispered it at school. Even elders began to avoid walking near Emma's new house once it got dark. Tenants began packing their bags. I can't stay here again, oh, one woman shouted. I saw her. She knocked on my window and begged me to buy mango. Another man added. I left my Bible open, but she still came. Her eyes were like fire. Emma heard the news and became very angry. Nonsense. He shouted at his gate man. Ghost K. Are we in a Nollywood movie? Tell everyone to stop spreading lies. But deep inside his heart, he was afraid. He knew what he had done. He knew Adora's spirit would not rest. That night, Emma didn't sleep. He sat in his sitting room with the lights on and a Bible in his hands. He was sweating, praying, drinking, pacing the floor. Then, exactly at 2 a.m., the mango voice came again. Buy your mango. Buy your mango. Emma stood up slowly, shaking. Suddenly, the front door of his mansion opened by itself. Cold wind rushed into the house. Curtains danced. Candles went off. Emma fell to his knees. Then he heard the ghost girl whisper beside his ear. You used my blood for this house. Now I will use your soul to destroy it. Emma screamed. By morning, Emma looked like a madman. His eyes were red, his hair rough, and his hands shaking. He didn't eat. He didn't talk to anyone. He just sat outside his mansion, staring at nothing. Meanwhile, the tenants in Golden Heights made a final decision. They had to leave. One after the other, cars and wheelbarrows entered the compound. Men packed mattresses, women carried basins, and children cried as they rushed out of the house. Some didn't even wait to collect their balance of rent. Take the money, Emma. Just let me go. One woman shouted as she threw her keys at his feet. God forbid I sleep here one more night, another tenant said, tying her wrapper tightly as she hurried into a kiki with her baby. In less than 2 hours, all 6 flats were empty. The compound that used to be full of life now looked like a ghost town. Emma stood by his window and watched them leave. His hands were on his head. His lips were dry. He knew the ghost had won. That night, the whole street was quiet. No generator sound. No children playing. Just silence. And the fear of a girl with mangoes. At exactly 2 a.m., the voice returned. Buy your mango. Sweet mango. This time, it was louder than ever. And Emma was alone in the house. Now, Emma was alone in the big house that once brought him pride. The building was quiet. Too quiet. No laughter. No footsteps. No noise of children playing or tenants arguing. Just silence. And shadows. Emma stayed inside all day. He locked every door and every window. He switched on all the lights and placed a Bible in every corner of the house. He even called a prophet to pray, but the prophet didn't last long. As soon as the man of God entered, he looked around and said, There is blood crying here, strong blood. I cannot stay. You need to confess. And he left without taking a dime. Now, Emma was terrified. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He sat on the couch with his hands around his knees like a small boy. Every small sound made him jump. Even the ticking of his wall clock scared him. Then the night came. The sky turned dark. The wind began to blow. At exactly 2 a.m., it happened again. Buy your mango. Sweet mango. Emma looked toward the sitting room door. It opened slowly by itself. A cold wind swept into the room. The air smelled like ripe mango and dust. Then he saw her. Adora. She entered slowly, barefoot, holding the same tray of mangoes on her head. Her eyes were full of tears. Her voice shook the house. You killed me for house. Now, let the house kill you. Emma stood frozen in fear. Adora was no longer the sweet, innocent girl who had sold mangoes. Now, she was a vengeful spirit, her body glowing with an eerie light, her face twisted with anger. You think you can take what doesn't belong to you? Adora's voice echoed through the room. Her voice was no longer the soft, gentle one Emma had heard weeks ago. Now, it was deep and filled with rage. I didn't mean it, Emma stammered, falling to his knees. His heart was pounding in his chest. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. I was only trying to get rich. I thought it was just a small sacrifice. I never thought. You never thought of me. Adora cut him off. But now, you will feel the pain of losing everything. Emma looked around the room desperately. He reached for a cross on the wall, hoping that some spiritual power might save him, but his hand froze in mid-air. The spirit of Adora had already sealed every exit. There was nowhere to run. Suddenly, the walls began to shake. The lights flickered on and off. The sound of mangoes falling filled the air. Adora floated around Emma, her tray of mangoes swaying as if carried by invisible hands. Buy your mango. Buy your mango. She sang in a chilling, mocking tone. The voice echoed, growing louder and louder. Emma could feel the coldness of her presence all around him, as if the room was turning to ice. His legs couldn't move. His body felt like stone. You will never know the peace of your money, Adora continued. You will never see the riches you stole from me. This house will be your grave. The lights went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. Emma could hear his own heartbeat. Boom. 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 But in the silence, the voice of Adora grew louder. Buy your mango. Buy your mango. And then, Emma screamed. The room trembled with each passing second. Emma's eyes were wide with terror as he looked at Adora, who seemed to grow taller, her ghostly form becoming more powerful with each heartbeat. Please. Forgive me. Emma begged, his voice trembling. He could feel the weight of his sins pressing down on him, crushing him. Adora's eyes glowed bright red as she floated closer to him. Her voice was like a whisper, but it seemed to cut through Emma's soul. You should have thought of the consequences before you killed me, Emma, she whispered. You should have thought of your life before you took mine. Emma tried to crawl backward, but he was paralyzed with fear. He could no longer move his legs. The coldness from Adora's spirit filled the room, making the air thick and suffocating. Suddenly, Adora raised her hand, and the house seemed to respond to her command. The walls began to crack, and the floor groaned under the pressure of the power they had gained. This is your punishment. With a mighty force, Adora slammed her hand down, and the house began to break apart. The ceiling shattered, and pieces of the luxurious walls crumbled. Emma was thrown to the ground as the very building he had spent so much time and money on was torn apart by the ghost's wrath. Through the dust and falling debris, Emma crawled, trying to escape, but the house was collapsing faster than he could move. The walls seemed to close in around him, and the sound of cracking wood and stone filled the air. You will never enjoy the wealth you built on my blood, Adora's voice echoed, as the destruction continued. Emma's body trembled with fear and regret as he reached out, trying to grab hold of something. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The house, his empire, was falling apart before his very eyes. Adora's laughter filled the air, as if mocking him. The coldness of her presence seemed to freeze everything around him, even time itself. Boom. The roof collapsed with a loud crash. Emma screamed one last time as the building completely fell apart, burying him under the rubble. The spirit of Adora had fulfilled her promise. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the village, all that remained of Emma's mansion was a pile of broken stones and dust. The once beautiful house, filled with pride and wealth, was now nothing but ruins. Not a single piece of the building stood tall anymore. The villagers gathered around the wreckage, stunned and confused. They couldn't believe their eyes. Emma, the richest man in the village, was gone. No one had heard a sound of struggle, no cries for help, just the deafening silence of a house crumbling to its doom. One of the older men from the village, Uncle Uche, who had always warned Emma about the dangers of greed, was the first to speak. Ah, this is not just bad luck. This is punishment, he said, shaking his head. It is the work of the spirits. Emma didn't listen to the elders. He thought money could solve everything, but he lost his soul. The villagers whispered among themselves, all agreeing that Emma had brought this upon himself. There were those who shook their heads sadly, knowing that his greed had led him to a horrible fate. Others were frightened, looking over their shoulders, fearing that whatever had happened to Emma might affect them too. Some younger men tried to search through the rubble, hoping to find anything of value, but every effort was in vain. There was nothing left. No treasure. No riches. Just a pile of broken stones and dirt. By noon, the village elders had gathered, and they performed a ritual to appease the spirits. They prayed for Emma's soul, hoping that somehow, he might find peace. But they all knew the truth. Emma's actions had been too much for the spirits to forgive. Let this be a lesson, Uncle Uche said, his voice grave. No amount of money is worth losing your soul. And no house, no matter how beautiful, can protect you from the consequences of evil. As time went on, the villagers began to speak of Adora not just as the innocent girl who was sacrificed, but as a spirit of justice who had given them an important lesson. Her story became a legend, passed down from one generation to the next. Children grew up hearing about Adora's courage and her ability to right the wrongs done to her. The adults told their stories around the fire at night, not with fear, but with a deep respect for the spirit that had changed their village forever. Adora didn't just punish Emma, Uncle Uche would say. She saved us all from the path of greed. Soon, people began to visit her memorial by the river. They would bring offerings of mangoes, flowers, and small tokens of appreciation. They would kneel before her plaque and pray for wisdom, thanking her for the lessons she had taught them. And each time, it felt as if the air around the river grew lighter, as if Adora's spirit were watching over them. In the years that followed, the village flourished in a way it never had before. The people had learned to live honestly, to work hard, and to cherish what truly mattered in life. There was no longer a need for sacrifices or desperate attempts to get rich. Peace reigned, and the villagers knew that their connection with the earth, the river, and each other was more important than any material wealth. One day, a young boy named Chijoke, who had grown up hearing the legend of Adora, stood by the river with his friends. He looked at the memorial stone and said softly, "I will never forget the story of Adora. She saved our village. She showed us the way to true happiness." His friends nodded in agreement, and they all silently placed their hands on the stone, honoring the memory of the girl who had taught them so much. Years passed, but the story of Adora's sacrifice and the lessons she taught the villagers remained vivid in their hearts. The village flourished, and peace seemed to embrace every corner. However, there was one mystery that lingered, a mystery that no one could explain. Each year, when the mango trees near the river began to bloom, mangoes of extraordinary size and sweetness would appear on the branches. These mangoes were different from any others. They shone brightly in the sun, their skins a vibrant golden color that almost seemed to glow. The villagers believed that these mangoes were a gift from Adora's spirit, a symbol of her continued presence and protection over them. But there was something strange about the mangoes. No one could ever remember how they got there. They didn't grow like other mangoes. They just seemed to appear overnight, ripe and ready to be picked, always in the same place by the river. The villagers would gather these magical mangoes every season, and they became a special treat. But they never picked them for profit. No, the villagers treated these mangoes as sacred gifts, sharing them freely among themselves, giving thanks to Adora for the blessings of abundance. One day, a traveler from a distant land came to the village. He had heard rumors of the magical mangoes and the peaceful village that had once been plagued by greed. He asked the villagers about them. Uncle Uche, now an old man, smiled and told the traveler, "The mangoes are the spirit of Adora, still giving us blessings and teaching us lessons. They remind us that true wealth is not in money, but in love, community, and respect for the earth." The traveler was amazed. He had traveled far and wide in search of wealth and riches, but here, in this small, humble village, he had found something far more valuable: the gift of peace and contentment. As the seasons changed and the years went by, the story of Emma's downfall and Adora's justice became more than just a tale. It became a core part of the village's culture. The elders passed it on to the young, and the younger generation embraced the lessons with open hearts. The village had learned the most important truth: that no matter how much wealth one had, it could never replace peace, kindness, and the love of others. The villagers no longer worked for riches or success at any cost. Instead, they focused on creating a close-knit community where everyone helped one another. They traded goods, shared meals, and supported each other through hard times. There was no greed, no envy, just the understanding that true wealth was in the hearts of the people, not in the size of their homes or their bank accounts. Every year, the villagers would hold a festival by the river, where they would celebrate the life and sacrifice of Adora. The festival was simple, with songs, dances, and prayers. It wasn't just a way to remember Adora, it was a celebration of the lessons she had given them. Lessons that had changed the entire village forever. As part of the festival, the villagers would bring mangoes, the sacred fruits that grew by the river, still as magical as ever. The mangoes were shared freely, just as Adora had shared her life, and no one thought about keeping them for themselves. Everyone in the village felt that the mangoes were a symbol of Adora's spirit, a reminder to always live humbly and to cherish what was truly important. Even the young ones, like Chijoke, who had once played by the river as a child, grew up understanding the importance of balance in life. Chijoke often told his friends the story of Adora, how she had transformed their village, and how they could never forget the importance of living with respect for one another and for the earth. And so, the cycle continued, generation after generation. The village lived in harmony, learning to work the land, care for one another, and honor their ancestors. Adora's legacy lived on, not just in the mangoes, but in the very spirit of the village, which thrived because they had learned the hardest lesson of all. True happiness comes from love, not gold. Years after the village had transformed, the story of Adora's sacrifice was still fresh in the hearts of those who remembered her. The younger generation, who had grown up hearing about the girl who was lost but had returned to change the world, felt a deep connection to her spirit. They were determined to live by the lessons passed down to them. One bright morning, Chijoke, now a young man, stood at the village's edge, looking out over the river that had witnessed the change. The same river that had been the silent observer of so much history, including Adora's sacrifice, now seemed like a place of eternal peace. The river's calm waters reflected the sky above, and for a moment, Chijoke thought he could feel Adora's presence there, watching over the land she had saved. This is the future we must build, he thought to himself, as he turned back toward the village. The future was no longer about seeking wealth or chasing the impossible dreams of luxury. It was about creating a community where everyone could thrive, a community where peace, respect, and hard work were the true treasures. As he walked back into the village, he could hear the laughter of children and see the farmers working together. There were no more signs of greed, no more tension between the rich and the poor. The village was united. The land was rich in spirit and love, not just in crops. The elders, who had seen the village go through so many changes, looked at Chijoke with pride. They knew that the values they had passed down would be safe in his hands. He had already shown that he understood the true meaning of wealth. We must always remember, no matter how much we grow, we must never forget Adora, Chijoke would often say. She gave us the greatest gift, the wisdom to live in peace. As the village continued to prosper, the memory of Emma faded into the past. His mansion, his riches, and his greed were no longer spoken of. Instead, the villagers focused on what they could build together with love and honesty, following the example set by Adora's spirit. As time passed, the village continued to grow, becoming known far and wide for its peaceful way of life. Traders from other lands visited, not just to exchange goods but to hear the story of the village that had learned to live with respect for the earth and one another. People came to see how such a small community had achieved such a deep sense of unity and happiness, and how they had found riches that could never be measured in gold or silver. Every year, during the festival by the river, the villagers would gather to honor Adora's spirit. The memorial by the river, where she had been remembered, became a symbol not just of her sacrifice, but of the lasting power of goodness over evil. Her story was not just about punishment. It was about redemption and the hope that good could come from even the darkest of times. The mangoes continued to grow in abundance by the river, appearing as though Adora herself was blessing the land each season. It was said that those who took part in the festival and shared the mangoes with others would be blessed with happiness and prosperity, not just in material things, but in health, relationships, and peace of mind. Chijoke, now the village leader, often stood before the villagers and spoke of Adora's legacy. He reminded them that their true strength came from their connection to one another and to the land. Adora is still with us, he would say. She walks among us in every good deed, every smile shared, every mango picked from the tree. It was on one such occasion, as the sun set over the village and the festival reached its peak, that a small group of travelers arrived from a distant village. They had heard the story of Adora, and they came seeking the wisdom of the village. Chijoke welcomed them warmly, sitting with them by the river as the evening light turned golden. Adora's story is our story, he said. It is a story of the consequences of greed, but also a story of how love and respect can rebuild even the deepest wounds. The travelers listened intently, moved by the power of the story and the sense of peace that filled the air. Many more years passed, and the village continued to thrive. Chijoke, now an elder himself, had passed down the lessons of Adora to the younger generation. His children, and their children after them, grew up in a village that was rich not in material wealth, but in the strength of community, love, and respect. Every year, the village would come together by the river to celebrate Adora's spirit. The festival had become more than just a commemoration, It had become a reminder of what was truly important in life. The people had learned the value of simplicity and of helping one another, and they passed on these values with pride. The once wealthy mansion that Emma had built stood as a quiet, empty house at the edge of the village. It had long been abandoned, overtaken by nature's vines and trees. No one spoke of it anymore, and it was as though the house itself had been swallowed up by the earth. Its memory fading just as Emma's greed had faded into history. Instead, the villagers spoke of Adora and the lasting peace she had brought them. One day, as Chijioke sat by the river, looking at the memorial for Adora, he thought about how much had changed since those early days. Emma's death, the tragedy, the ghostly visits from the girl he had sacrificed. Everything had brought the village to where it was today. In a strange way, it was Emma's greed and Adora's spirit that had led them to find something far more precious than wealth. Chijioke smiled softly, his heart full of gratitude. She saved us, he thought, and her spirit lives on in every moment of peace, every gesture of kindness. It was then that the villagers gathered together to plant a tree in Adora's memory. This tree would symbolize the continued growth of the lessons she had taught, a tree whose roots would grow deep in the earth and whose branches would reach up to the sky, connecting the village to the past and to the future. The tree blossomed every year, just like the mangoes that continued to appear, and every time the villagers looked at it, they were reminded that peace, humility, and love were the true treasures in life. Last. And so, the story of Emma's greed and the tragic fate of the innocent virgin girl comes to a haunting end. Through her spirit's vengeance, Emma's wealth and power were lost, and his name became a warning to all. It reminds us that no amount of riches can ever compensate for the price of human life and the devastating consequences of selfishness. The spirit of the virgin girl, though avenged, serves as a reminder of the consequences of cruelty, greed, and the darkness that lingers when one chooses to harm the innocent. As we close this chapter, we learn that true wealth doesn't come from power or riches, but from the kindness and goodness we show to others. May Emma's story serve as a cautionary tale to all of us. Never sacrifice the innocence of others for personal gain, for the cost is far greater than we can ever imagine. The end. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the tragic tale of Emma and the vengeful spirit. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories filled with suspense, twists, and life lessons. Your thoughts and feedback are always welcome, so feel free to share what you think about this story in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, and remember, the choices we make today can haunt us forever. Take care, and see you in the next episode.